Welcome back to the Shakespeare Showdown show. This is episode number 3 and round 3 of the Romeo and Juliet Showdown. We now have 8 contestants remaining in our tournament. In our last episode, 3 of our 8 contestants earned a sort of immunity for this round, so those 3 won't be in danger of elimination today. The contest today will be a sudden death round between the other 5 contestants, who all finished the last episode as elimination nominees. The 5 contestants who will be competing in this round, shown here colored in red, will be the 1936 movie, the 1968 movie, the 1976 TV movie, the 1978 TV movie, and the 1996 movie. The 1992, the 2009, and the 2018 contestants, which coincidentally are all stage performances, will all be granted automatic advancement to the next round. Not because they're all stage performances, that's just a coincidence. It's because they all earned it in the last episode. The 1954 movie and the 2013 stage play have already been eliminated from this tournament. Today we will be discussing the famous orchard scene. I call it the orchard scene. The text says the scene location is the Capulet Orchard. Most people, I wager, would call this the balcony scene, although there is no mention of any balcony. All the play says is that Juliet appears at a window, although she's almost always seen on a balcony, because once Juliet was put on a balcony, there was just no going back from it. It was so good. This is possibly Shakespeare's most famous scene. I bet there are people in Mongolia who know about this scene. Now, before we start, there is some confusion about whether this scene is the first or second scene in the second act. As best we know, the subdivision of Shakespeare's plays into acts and scenes wasn't something that William Shakespeare himself made. They are conventions that were imposed later. Most printed versions have the orchard scene as Act 2, Scene 2. The way they have it is that Act 2, Scene 1 is when Romeo is outside the Capulet garden wall, and then when he crosses the garden wall to enter the orchard, that's the beginning of Act 2, Scene 2, with the first line of the new scene being, "He jests at scars that never felt a wound," which sounds like it should belong in the same scene as before. Some editions, such as the Norton Complete Works 2nd edition, which was the edition I used in college, have both parts, when Romeo is outside the orchard and when he's inside the orchard, as one whole scene called Act 2, Scene 1. And then Act 2, Scene 2 is when Romeo visits the friar. But in this show, we'll call this Act 2, Scene 2, which we believe is the most common convention. But it can be different, for your information. So, what happens here? Well, we have Juliet up at the window or on the balcony, and Romeo is down at ground level. At first, Romeo sees Juliet, but Juliet doesn't see Romeo back. Everything they say, they are saying to themselves, for the first part. Juliet can't hear what Romeo is saying, but Romeo can hear what Juliet is saying. This is when Juliet says her famous line, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" Romeo eventually makes his presence known, and the two of them have an interaction that we'll call interaction number 1, which is the main interaction. Then eventually what happens is Juliet's nurse calls her to come inside the house. Juliet goes inside the house, leaving Romeo by himself, at which point he gives some brief commentary, saying, "O blessed, blessed night, I am afeard, being in night, all this is but a dream, too flattering sweet to be substantial." Then Juliet returns, and she and Romeo have interaction number 2. Part of interaction number 2 is when Juliet says to Romeo, "If that thy bent of love be honorable, thy purpose marriage, send me word tomorrow by one that I'll procure to come to thee." The nurse then calls Juliet back into the house again. Juliet goes inside the house again and leaves Romeo by himself a second time. Here Romeo gives the following commentary. "Love goes toward love as schoolboys from their books, but love from love toward school with heavy looks. And this is where we will start our study today. Romeo in this moment is leaving, or beginning to leave, the Capulet orchard. Then Juliet appears a third time and calls Romeo back with the following lines. Hissed, Romeo hissed. Oh, for a falconer's voice, to lure this tassel gentle back again. Bondage is hoarse, and may not speak aloud, else would I tear the cave where echo lies. Now when Romeo hears this, he comes back, and Romeo and Juliet have, you guessed it, interaction number 3. And in interaction number 3, there is a small problem that we see. It's a small problem, but it is a problem. And we know it's a problem because, as we will see, it often gets corrected. This is the interaction. Juliet says, Romeo. Romeo says, my dear. Juliet then asks, at what o'clock tomorrow shall I send to thee? In reference to what she said before about by one that I'll procure to come to thee. Romeo answers, at the hour of 9. And then Juliet says, I will not fail, 'tis 20 years till then, which is a super cute thing to say. Then Juliet says something inexplicable. She says, I have forgot why I did call thee back. To which Romeo responds, let me stand here till thou remember it, which is a super cute thing for him to say, by the way. But the thing that Juliet says doesn't make any sense. Juliet says that she forgot why she called Romeo back, but she didn't forget why she called Romeo back. She called Romeo back and then asked him a perfectly valid question, and Romeo gave her a perfectly valid answer. If, let's say, Juliet had called Romeo back, and then as soon as Romeo came back, she said, I have forgot why I did call thee back. That would have been super cute, because she's so totally Twitter-pated with Romeo that she calls him back, and then as soon as she sees him, her mind goes blank. It sounds like she forgets the question that she just asked him 2 seconds earlier. That goes a little bit beyond innocent Twitterpation. That's more like serious short-term amnesia. Like I said, we know this must be a problem because it so often gets corrected. We are going to study our contestants today and see how different versions of the play correct this problem, and unfortunately, how some versions of the play don't correct it. The 2 versions that don't do anything to correct the problem will do first. They are the 1976 Thames TV movie and the 1978 BBC TV movie. Coincidentally, both are TV versions. Let's first look at both of these and see how it sounds uncorrected, starting with the Thames. This is Christopher Neame as Romeo and Anne Hassan as Juliet, starting with the line, Love goes towards love. Let's listen.
Love goes towards love as schoolboys from their books. But love from love towards school with heavy looks.
Romeo. Oh, for a falconer's voice to lure this tassel gentle back again. Bondage is hoarse and may not speak aloud, else would I tear the cave where echo lies and make her airy tongue more hoarse than mine with repetition of my Romeo.
It is my soul that calls upon my name. Our silver sweet sound lovers' tongues by night, like softest music to attending ears.
Romeo.
Aeneas,
What o'clock tomorrow shall I send to thee?
by the hour of 9.
I will not fail. 'Tis 20 year till then. I forgot why I did call thee back.
Let me stand here till thou remember it.
So you can see how this is a problem. It just doesn't make sense for Juliet to say what she says unless she has a severe brain injury. In fact, let's listen to it again, and this time pretend that she has a severe brain injury. So this is Juliet now with a severe brain injury, suffering severe short-term amnesia.
Romeo.
Aeneas,
What o'clock tomorrow shall I send to thee?
by the hour of 9.
I will not fail. 'Tis 20 year till then. I forgot why I did call thee back.
It makes a little bit more sense if she has a brain injury, doesn't it? Anyway, so that was the Thames. Now let's listen to the same thing from the BBC. This will be Patrick Reichardt as Romeo and Rebecca Sire as Juliet. Let's listen.
Romeo!
It is my soul that calls upon my name. How silver sweet sound lovers' tongues by night, like softest music to attending ears.
Romeo.
My sweet,
At what o'clock tomorrow shall I send to thee?
by the hour of 9.
I shall not fail. 'Tis 20 years till then. I forgot why I did call you back.
Let me stand here till thou remember it.
Well, there are solutions to this problem. Solutions, that is, that don't require the audience to pretend Juliet has a brain injury. So let's examine some of these solutions. The remaining 3 contestants that we have are the 36 movie, the 68 movie, and the 96 movie. Each of these movies actually gives us a different example of how to solve the problem in a different way. Let's start with the 1936, and this will be Leslie Howard as Romeo and Norma Shearer as Juliet. Stop. Just to interject here, I think that this version probably has the most beautiful garden of all versions, which is really impressive, especially considering it's in black and white. Anyway, continuing.
Romeo. Romeo.
It is my soul that calls upon my name. How silver sweet sound lovers' tongues by night, like softest music to attending ears. My dear.
I have forgot why I did call thee back.
Let me stand here till I remember it.
I shall forget to have thee still stand there, remembering how I love thy company.
And I'll still stay to have thee still forget, forgetting any other home but this.
So this version does what we hypothesized before. It simply removes Juliet's question and Romeo's answer. Romeo comes back, and in her severe twitterpation, Juliet simply says she forgot why she called him back. It's a super cute way to handle the problem, and I think Norma Shearer and Leslie Howard do an excellent job. Therefore, let's remove this contestant from sudden elimination and advance it to the next round. And let's also, just for the sake of it, fast forward and watch the end of interaction number 3, which is Juliet's famous line, "Parting is such sweet sorrow," which is probably the best line in Shakespeare's most famous scene.
Good night. Good night. Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow.
Now, before we move on to our next example, I want to share with you this scene from the 1954 Renato Castellani movie, which we already eliminated in round 1. I said at that time that we may revisit this scene, and so we're going to share it now because they actually did the same thing that the 1936 movie did. So, this is the orchard scene from the 1954 movie, and this will be Lawrence Harvey as Romeo with Susan Chantal as Juliet. Let's listen to this.
Yes, Romeo, yes. Oh, for a falconer's voice to lure this tassel gentle back again. Romeo! Romeo!
My dear,
Romeo!
my dear.
I have forgot why I did call thee back.
Let me stand here till thou remember.
I shall forget to have thee still stand there.
And I'll still stay to have thee still forget.
So they did the same thing. They simply removed Juliet's question and Romeo's answer. I really, really appreciate the laughter between Romeo and Juliet in this version. The laughter is really romantic. It's too bad they were eliminated. And just for the heck of it, let's listen to Juliet's Sweet Sorrow from this movie.
Good night. Good night. Oh. Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow.
Moving on to our next example, we now have the 1968 movie. Let's listen to how they handle this problem. This is Leonard Whiting as Romeo and Olivia Hussey as Juliet.
Romeo, at what o'clock tomorrow shall I send to thee?
At the hour of 9.
I will not fail. Oh, 'tis 20 years till then. Romeo! I have forgot why I did call thee back.
Let me stand here till thou remember
I
it.
shall forget to have thee still stand there, remembering how I love thy company.
And I'll still stay to have thee still forget. Forgetting any other home but this.
Okay, so in this version, they include Juliet's question and Romeo's answer, but they put it before Juliet calls Romeo back again. This solution kind of gives us the best of both worlds, because we get Juliet's super cute line about "'tis 20 years till then," which can only come if she asks her question, and we get Romeo's super cute line, "Let me stand here till thou remember it," which can only come if Juliet has her moment of forgetfulness. This is very well handled by the director, and we think this deserves advancement to the next round. Now let's enjoy Juliet's sweet sorrow line from this version.
Good night. Good night. Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow.
By the way, notice how bright the sky is when this scene ends in this movie. We really, really like how the sun is already starting to come up at the end of this scene. It's so hopeful and optimistic. This is very, very good stuff. Alright, now let's look at the 1996 movie. I just want to say at the outset how much I love this version of the scene. I admire the 1936 version. I adore the 1968 version. But I absolutely worship this version for many reasons, some of which I don't even want to mention in this episode because I don't want to spoil them. I will say that this version does take a lot of liberties with Romeo and Juliet frolicking in the swimming pool and so forth. But all the liberties are harmless and they are all completely justified. This scene is of the highest literary importance. It's almost sacrosanct in a certain regard. This movie, I think, strikes the perfect balance. They respect the play, they respect the playwright, but they have a lot of fun with it. And the whole thing comes pretty close to perfect. Having said all that, let's listen to Leonardo DiCaprio as Romeo, starting with Love Goes Toward Love Again and Claire Danes as Juliet.
Love goes toward love as schoolboys from their books. But love from love towards school with heavy looks.
Romeo! What o'clock tomorrow shall I send to thee?
By the hour of 9.
I will not fail. 'Tis 20 year till then. Good night.
So in this version, we get Juliet's question and Romeo's answer, but the lines having to do with Juliet's forgetfulness are removed, which is yet another way to solve the problem, sort of the opposite of the 1936. It makes me sad that Juliet's forgetfulness is missing, because those lines are super cute when they're not causing a huge problem. But it was necessary to solve the problem, and they successfully solved it. So with that, the 1996 movie is now finally redeemed from purgatory as well, and will be immune from sudden elimination. Now let's listen to the Sweet Sorrow line by Claire Danes.
Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow.
This version of the Capulet Garden actually isn't too shabby either. Probably the top contender after the 1936, especially with the Christmas lights and the grotto feature in the swimming pool. This is some really strong stuff too. So we now have seen 3 different examples of how to solve the problem of Juliet's seemingly concussion-induced forgetfulness. You can either remove the part when she asks the question, remove the part when she says she forgets, or you can adjust the order a little bit and put the question and answer before their second separation to help it make more sense. This leaves us with our 2 television contestants, the Thames and the BBC. Which version should we eliminate, and which version should we redeem? I will say that both versions do something that we very much appreciate, besides being blindly loyal to the text, which is vaguely admirable. Both versions have something great to offer in this scene, so whichever one we decide to advance to the next round, we will have good reason to do so. So let's talk about the good things that these versions do. Starting with the BBC. Now this may seem like a trivial detail, because it's another landscape-related thing, but the thing we love about this version is the prominently featured palm tree next to Juliet's balcony. This tree, whether it was intentional or not, is a direct reference to something that Juliet said earlier in the play, which we actually heard in the last episode. When Romeo and Juliet speak to each other for the first time, in Act 1, Scene 5, remember, they have an exchange where Romeo calls his hands unworthy and refers to his 2 lips as pilgrims, and Juliet responds by saying, "Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss." Juliet calls Romeo a pilgrim, and she calls his hand a palm, and we all know that hands have palms. Now when she does this, of course, she's not referring to the Puritan pilgrims that sailed to Massachusetts, because that hasn't happened yet. A pilgrim here refers to a pilgrim to Jerusalem, aka the Holy Land, a symbol of which is the palm tree, because there are palm trees in Jerusalem. And when Jesus Christ entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, the Sunday before Passover, he was welcomed with branches of palm trees. And here we get an actual palm tree in the Capulet orchard, which I'm not even sure is appropriate climate-wise for Verona, but it makes wonderful literary sense. And it's not some minor detail in the background either. Romeo gets right up on it. Watch.
My sweet.
So the BBC gets extra credit points for that. Now what about the Thames version? What good thing does it do? Well, it does something rather spectacular, actually. It does something that no other contestant does. To see this, we need to expand our scope just a little more and fast forward to the very end of the scene, which is when Romeo finally leaves Juliet's garden. Romeo's last words in the garden usually are as follows: "Sleep dwell upon thine eyes, peace in thy breast. Would I were sleep in peace, so sweet to rest. Hence will I to my ghostly father's cell, his help to crave, and my dear Hap to tell. And then he runs away to go visit the friar, which is the next scene. Sometimes these lines are missing. The 54 movie, the 68 movie, and the 96 movie all cut them. Sometimes the first two are kept and the last two are cut. That's what the 36 movie does, and it's also what the BBC version does. This version, the Thames, includes these lines. In fact, let's play this part to set this up, shall we? Through the second line, ending with the word rest.
Sleep dwell upon thine eyes, peace in thy breast. Would I were sleep and peace, so sweet to rest.
Now, we're going to continue, and we're going to see that the Thames version of this scene does something a little weird. Normally, as I said, Romeo has just these 4 lines. This version includes these 4 lines, but it also gives Romeo 4 extra lines that Romeo hardly ever says. In between the first 2 lines and the last 2 lines, Romeo will say these 4 lines here. These 4 lines in the middle here are usually the first 4 lines spoken by the friar at the beginning of the very next scene. The next scene begins with a long monologue by the friar, and these 4 lines are the first 4 lines of that monologue. But in this version, the lines are given to Romeo. So let's listen to this, starting from the top so we get all 8 lines together. This is how it sounds.
Sleep dwell upon thine eyes, peace in thy breast. Would I were sleep and peace, so sweet to rest. The grey-eyed morn smiles on the frowning night, checkering the eastern clouds with streaks of light. And darkness fleckled like a drunkard reels from forth day's pathway made by Titan's wheels. Hence will I to my ghostly friar's close cell his help to crave and my dear Hap to tell.
Now, there is a reason for this. This isn't just cutting and pasting for the sake of cutting and pasting. The reason is that in an early printed version of the play, the 1623 First Folio, these lines are given, probably by mistake, to both Romeo in the spot that we see here and to the friar at the beginning of the next scene, which is where they appear in the Q1 and in the Q2. This fact, plus the simple fact that Romeo and the friar are given the exact same 4 lines, strongly indicates that it's probably a printing mistake. The natural solution to this mistake is to give the lines to the friar and only to the friar. But the Thames TV version apparently said, well, hold on a sec, why can't Romeo say these lines? So they gave these lines to Romeo, which is interesting. The friar doesn't repeat them, which we think is a good decision. The friar instead begins his speech with the line that would normally be his 5th line. I've never seen a version where Romeo and the friar both say all 4 lines. And we like hearing these lines spoken by Romeo. We like it a lot. They're really nice spoken by the friar too, but we actually prefer to hear them from Romeo at the end of this scene, for the same reason that we like the sun coming up like in the 1968 movie. It's hopeful, it's bright, it's happy. The morning twilight is literally smiling. Well, maybe not literally, but Romeo literally says that the morning is smiling. We really want this daybreak to happen at the end of this scene. We really do. And Romeo, being full of happiness and excitement, has more reason to say this than the friar does. So we appreciate the Thames version for giving us this. We think it was a bold decision, especially since the Thames doesn't hardly attempt anything interesting with the text. I mean, the 1936 movie and the 1954 movie, they both cut and paste like crazy. But the Thames doesn't do anything significant until they do this, and they hit it out of the ballpark. We love that they made this decision. Which is why it is with sweet sorrow that we will be eliminating this contestant, the 1976 Thames TV movie, from our tournament at this time. Why are we eliminating this version? Because it is extremely frustrating that they would do something so wonderful like this and give Romeo the redundant first folio lines demonstrating such initiative, such audacity, and yet somehow in the very same scene they ignore the glaring problem, Juliet's concussion problem, which is a problem that is begging to be solved. How could they do that? It's inexplicable. Studying the Thames version of this scene and the BBC version of this scene is like having two kids, both of whom you find generally disappointing. But then one kid goes and demonstrates some random flash of brilliance out of nowhere. You're more disappointed in the one that showed the random flash of brilliance because it showed potential. The Thames version of this scene is better than the BBC version of this scene, the BBC palm tree notwithstanding. And because the Thames version is better, it's the more disappointing version when it leaves the glaring problem unsolved. The BBC version is average at best, but at least it doesn't toy with our emotions like the Thames version does. It's just blindly loyal to the text with nothing interesting besides a gorgeous palm tree, which is very interesting and probably there by accident. The Thames version gives us a bewildering mix of optimism but also obliviousness. This isn't a fun mix. What happens in the Thames version of this scene is nothing short of a tragedy. We knew this was a tragedy going in, but we didn't expect to feel the empty and vexing brand of sadness that we're feeling now. So, farewell to the 1976 Thames TV movie. Parting is such sweet sorrow indeed. And the 1978 is now redeemed from its Episode 2 transgressions. On the next episode of the Shakespeare Showdown show, with 7 contestants remaining in the tournament, we will be examining the very next scene in the play, which is the introduction of Romeo's spiritual advisor, and the man who will agree to marry Romeo and Juliet, Friar Lawrence. And we aren't done talking about the orchard scene either, not by a long shot. So we will have more of the orchard scene to discuss in Sweet Sorrow Part 2, including the counsel of Romeo's ghostly father, next time on the Shakespeare Showdown show. Thanks for watching.